Back in November, I bought and tested 25 projectors with price tags under $100, and I found some pretty good options if your budget is tight. But if you want a lot more performance for just a little bit more money, this video is for you because I've got 20 new projectors priced between $100 and $600, and I'm going to test their brightness, contrast, focus, color space coverage, and power draw, and then I'm going to put them side by side in a picture quality test, and then finally I'll do some more in-depth testing of their Smart OS, input lag, speaker quality, and fan noise to make sure that you get the best projector and the most for your money in 2025, and as always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel. Starting out with brightness testing, in this price range, it's a lot more common for projectors to list their brightness in ANSI lumens, which is the industry standard, but it doesn't mean that they're telling the truth about it. I tested each of the 20 projectors using the ANSI measurement standard, where you take 9 individual brightness readings and multiply the average brightness by the screen size in square meters to get the ANSI lumens. And the brightest projector in this video was the Wemax Vogue with 1404 ANSI lumens on its less color accurate bright mode, but is still respectable 1142 lumens on movie mode. And the Yabber K3 was the only other projector to measure over 1000 ANSI lumens, coming in at 1078 in its brightest mode. And while they may not have been the brightest, I think these 6 projectors also deserve recognition for measuring within 95% or more of their advertised lumens. And I'd also like to point out that the Ultimia, Hawking, Vopals, and Onoyo measured less than 50% of their advertised lumens, so shame on them. I also measured each of the projectors' contrast by dividing the brightness of a pure white screen by the brightness of a pure black screen, and I found that as usual, these single LCD projectors had excellent contrast ratios, with the Yabber K3 on top with over 4001 native contrast. But the top 5 projectors were all over 2800 to 1 native contrast, which competes with projectors all the way up into the $5,000 range. And you can see that as expected, the 2 DLP projectors in this video, the XGME Elfin and Wemax Vogue, both had comparatively terrible contrast ratios under 500 to 1. However, DLP does have some major advantages over single LCD, starting with brightness uniformity, which is calculated by dividing the dimmest of the 9 ANSI measurements by the brightest of those measurements. And as expected, the XGME Elfin came out on top with 88% uniformity, followed by the Wemax with 80%. DLP also tends to have much better focus uniformity, and to test that, I started out by projecting this image and pulling clear focus on the center of the screen. And then I took individual pictures of each corner and rated the corner focus from 1 to 10. And as expected, those DLP projectors from XGME and Wemax both had excellent corner focus, even though the Elfin had a little bit of screen door effect, and the Vogue looked like it lost some pixels to its image processing. The best focus from a single LCD projector was from the Dangbei N2, but the Alvar F505 and Nexigo PJ40 were also pretty good, scoring 8 out of 10 points, and the 2 worst performers in terms of focus were the Magcubic HY450, which had a lot of ghosting near the edges of the screen due to its short throw, and the Arzen Boom Mini, which had all 4 corners completely out of focus whenever the center of the screen was dialed in. DLP also tends to have much better color reproduction, and I measured each of the projector's ability to produce all the colors in the Rec 709 SDR color space, and I found that both of those DLP projectors covered 95% of Rec 709, while the single LCD projectors definitely struggled, covering between just 50 and 80%, which may cause them to look comparatively washed out and dull. But there's only one way to know for sure, so I set up 2 100-inch screens and I put the projectors head to head, going from least expensive to the most. And for round 1, I put the brightest projector from my sub $100 video, the Groview JQ818C on the left, and the Arzen Easy D1 on the right. And this round was not particularly close, with the Groview having twice the brightness, better focus, and 10 times the contrast of the Arzen, so it easily moved on. Then in round 2, the Groview JQ818C was on the left and the Magcubic HY450 was on the right. And this was much closer than round 1, but the HY450 was too green and oversaturated. And whenever I'm doing these side-by-side tests, I always try to adjust picture options to give each projector the best chance. But this HY450 didn't have any picture options at all. So I was kind of forced to choose the Groview here due to the inaccurate colors on the HY450. So that meant that round 3 was the Groview JQ818C on the left and the Arzen Easy D1 Pro on the right. And the extra 100 lumens of the D1 Pro over the D1 Standard definitely did make a difference, but due to the lack of contrast, this round was never really close, and the Groview easily won this matchup too. Round 4 put the Groview JQ818C on the left and the Vopels M10 on the right, and the picture on the Vopels looked completely yellowed and gross, like it had been in a house filled with cigarette smoke for the last 5 years. And combining that with some poor image processing, the Vopels didn't stand a chance. So for round 5, the Groview JQ818C was on the left and the Auking H10 was on the right. And this round was very close, and I thought the Groview did a slightly better job in the very darkest scenes, but the color temperature, white balance, and saturation were better on the Auking. So even though I thought that the Auking's image was far from perfect, I thought it was good enough to move on to the next round. And that meant that in round 6, it was the Ultimia Apollo on the left and the Auking H10 on the right, and the Ultimia was really red and oversaturated by default, but I was able to adjust its picture options to get it a little bit more in line, which helped it perform better in bright scenes, and slightly better tone mapping and contrast helped it in dark scenes, meaning the Ultimia took this round. Then round 7 was the Ultimia Apollo on the left and the Alvar F505 on the right, and this was the first round that I thought that there was a significant upgrade over the $99 Groview JQ818C. And not only did the Alvar have excellent color, but it was also twice as bright with much better contrast. However, I did have to increase the brightness on the Alvar all the way up to 59 to stop it from crushing shadow detail in dark scenes, which caused it to be a little bit washed out in bright scenes, but it still easily won this round over the Ultimia. Round 8 then put the Nexigo PJ40 on the left, which has been my baseline recommendation for anyone looking for a sub $300 projector for the last 2 years, and the Alvar F505 on the right. And in bright scenes, the PJ40 was a little bit too red and very slightly oversaturated. But the biggest difference was in dark scenes, where the Alvar's tone mapping and image processing made the PJ40's image look a bit flat and lacking in shadow depth. So surprisingly, the Alvar took down my baseline recommendation and moved on again. And that made round 9 the Elephas W1K on the left and the Alvar F505 on the right. And after switching the Elephas into user mode, it was almost perfect in terms of brightness, contrast, and white balance, even without making any adjustments. And I thought that both of these projectors looked incredibly good in bright scenes, with my only nitpick being that the Alvar maybe looked a little bit too red, and the Elephas maybe looked ever so slightly too green. And in dark scenes, they were also very close, but the Elephas had slightly higher peak brightness in the highlights while maintaining a very impressive black floor. So while they both looked good, I definitely thought the Elephas earned a win in this very close round. So round 10 then put the Elephas W1K on the left and the Dangbei N2 on the right, and the Dangbei was another surprisingly strong performer with good color accuracy and saturation, and it even held up in the brightest scenes despite having 300 less lumens than the Elephas. But the big difference was in dark scenes, where the Elephas had more headroom for highlights, which gave it a lot more pop and shadow depth, meaning the Elephas also took this round, but the Dangbei did look pretty good. In round 11, the Elephas W1K was on the left and the Hapron JQ820 was on the right. And I think that the Hapron had all the right specs to win this round, but I couldn't get it to stop crushing shadow detail. And anytime I raised the brightness to get it to more accurately display darker areas in bright scenes, like Danny's hair and Henry's shirt, it would also raise the black floor in darker scenes, making the entire image look comparatively washed out, so the Elephas moved on again. Round 12 then put the Elephas W1K on the left and the Hapron 510G on the right, and I don't really understand this projector. Hapron basically took their $50 Hapron H1, which is a great value for the money, and stuck a Google TV streaming stick in it and then raised the price by over $200. But it's just not competitive at this price point. And the Elephas frankly embarrassed the 510G in this round. Similarly, round 13 was the Elephas W1K on the left and the Nexigo PJ40 Ultra on the right. And like the last round, the PJ40 Ultra takes the very capable PJ40 and adds a smart OS, this time for an increase of around $40. But I found that the picture options on the PJ40 Ultra were not as good as the original PJ40, and like the Hapron JQ820, I couldn't find a combination of brightness and contrast that would preserve shadow detail in bright scenes without raising the black floor in dark scenes. And watching it back on video, the PJ40 Ultra looks better than it did in person. And like I said, despite my best efforts to adjust the picture options on the Nexigo, I thought that the Elephas still looked significantly better overall, at least in person. So in round 14, it was the Elephas W1K on the left and the Xgimi Elfin Flip on the right. And this didn't feel like a really fair fight, since the Elephas was twice as bright with 10 times the contrast. But the color on the Xgimi was extremely good, and you can see some deep reds in Danny's sweater that the Xgimi's DLP RGB chip was able to display that the single LCD on the W1K just couldn't. Still, in dark scenes, it was absolutely no contest, and the Elephant's black floor was way too high to compete, so the Elephas moved on in this round also. Round 15 was the Elephas W1K on the left, and the ViewSonic LX60 HD on the right, and there's really no nice way to say this. The ViewSonic is just terrible. It had poor color accuracy, bad tone mapping, and a 500:1 contrast ratio that made it nowhere near the quality of the Elephas, which easily won this round. So in round 16, the Elephas W1K was on the left again, and the Onoyo ON03 was on the right. And they have identical operating systems and picture options, but the Elephas is twice as bright with twice the contrast. So there wasn't much to see in this round either, and the Elephas easily moved on. Round 17 put the Elephas W1K on the left and the Arzen Boom Mini on the right. And as I mentioned earlier, the Boom Mini's focus is just not good. And in addition to being dimmer and a bit more red-shifted than the Elephas, the Boom Mini was also visibly blurry even without text on the screen, and in the darkest scenes there were diagonal blue streaks running across the entire image. So this round was another easy win for the Elephas. Round 18 was the Elephas W1K on the left and the Wemax Vogue on the right. And when I was buying projectors for this video, I thought that the Wemax Vogue was going to absolutely dominate everything else in the video. Because a DLP projector with a bright 4 LED light source for $423 is an insane deal. And to be fair, the color and brightness on the Wemax were top tier. But contrast is so important, and the Elephas has over 6 times more contrast with the Wemax, and the black levels on the Wemax were extremely gray and washed out in comparison. So the Elephas ended up taking this round also. In round 19, the Elephas W1K was on the left, and the most expensive projector from this year, the $499 Jabra K3, was on the right. And like the Haprun JQ820 and the Nexigo PJ40 Ultra, I just couldn't stop the Jabra from absolutely crushing shadows. And there was zero detail in Henry's shirt or in Danny's hair, even after raising the brightness to 60, which then completely ruined the dark scene's picture quality. And overall, I have to say that this was a pretty disappointing round from a projector with such impressive stats on paper. And it just goes to show how important image processing actually is. So last, in round 20, I put the Elephas W1K on the left, and the winner from last year's picture quality testing, the $599 Paris Rhone 4K on the right, and the increased resolution and top-notch focus of the native 4K screen on the Paris Rhone were definitely noticeable, but I thought that the tone mapping and preservation of shadow details on the Elephas were a significant upgrade, and they were well worth the trade-off of having 1080p resolution instead of 4K. And that means that the Elephas W1K won 12 rounds straight to take the overall top spot for 2025 viewing experience, but I do think that the Alvar F505 and Nexigo PJ40 were pretty close behind that, and the Wemax Vogue was behind them in 4th place. And then here are the rest of the viewing experience rankings for 2025. Obviously, viewing experience is very important, but there are quite a few other differences between these projectors that might make it worth it to accept slightly lower image quality in return for something that works better in your space. Starting first with throw ratio, which is how far away from the screen the projector needs to be to make a specific sized image. And here are the distances required for a 100-inch diagonal screen and their resulting throw ratios. And you can see that the PJ40 has a pretty long throw, while the Elephas and Wemax are on the shorter side of what we consider standard throw. And the MagCubic HY450 would actually qualify as a short throw projector with a throw ratio of 0.64, projecting a 100-inch screen from less than 5 feet away. Another interesting throw characteristic is that DLP projectors normally have the bottom of the screen lined up with the bottom of the lens, which is sometimes called 100% offset, while most single LCD projectors have the center of the lens aligned with the center of the screen, which is called 0% offset. And in this video, the DLP projectors from XGIMI and Wemax both have that typical 100% offset, and almost all of the LCD projectors have 0%. Except for the MagCubic HY450, which is very close to 100% offset, similar to DLP projectors, which I think makes placement much easier than with the typical 0% offset we find in single LCD projectors, which have to be mounted in the exact middle of the screen. Another big difference in this price category is how many smart features are included in the projector, and I'm going to define those as automatic or manual 4-point digital keystone, motorized and/or autofocus, and a smart OS that includes streaming apps like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Hulu. Starting out with 4-point keystone, when you're looking at projectors that are under $100, this is a pretty rare feature. But in this $100 to $500 price category, all the projectors have this feature in one way or another. But it's important to note that DLP projectors like the XGIMI Elephant and Wemax Vogue will maintain much better focus uniformity than single LCD projectors when they're not aligned perfectly with the screen. Second, motorized focus is definitely handy because you can stand right next to the screen to get the focus dialed in perfectly from the remote. And all the projectors in this video except for the Nexigo PJ40 and Haprun 510G have motorized focus, and most of them have some form of camera-based automatic focusing. But in my experience, you can usually get a better result by turning off the autofocus setting and dialing in the focus yourself. And last, the majority of the projectors in this video are using a more budget-friendly smart OS that has the NetRange App Store, which is fine if all you need is YouTube, TikTok, Netflix, and Prime Video, but for things like Disney and Hulu, you'll have to use the web-based mouse mode versions or just get an external streaming stick. The XGIMI Elephas Flip has almost identical compatibility to NetRange with what they call XGIMI OS in the XGIMI App Store, but it does add free streaming TV channels called XGIMI TV, which is similar to what Samsung has with Tizen OS. The MagicCubic HY450 that I'm testing has an older version of Android, which doesn't have great app compatibility and probably wouldn't be something that you'd want to use as your only streaming option. And the Wemax has Fang OS and Aptoid, which again are not particularly useful since the only apps that you can install are old, meant for mobile phones, and are generally unsupported. And pretty much the only operating system that gives you full compatibility is Google TV on the Jabra K3, ViewSonic LX60 HD, Arzen Boom Mini, and Haprun 510G, but none of those projectors perform particularly well in the side-by-side testing, and in my opinion, they're all much more expensive than their performance justifies. So it is possible that Google TV certification just costs too much money to make it worth it at this price point. And the big question for me is, other than the XGIMI Elephas Flip that's specifically designed for portability, why would you ever want a half-baked built-in operating system that adds $50 to $100 to the price of your projector instead of just getting a Roku or a Fire Stick that costs $20 to $30 and it's got full compatibility and support for all streaming apps? Because that's definitely what I prefer. The other downside of having a smart OS built in is that it tends to increase input lag, which is bad for gaming on your projector. And in general, input lag numbers under 20 milliseconds are very good for gaming. Between 20 and 50 milliseconds is acceptable but not great, and anything over 100 milliseconds just won't work for gaming because the delay between pressing a button on your controller and seeing the action on the screen is too large. And I was both surprised and disappointed to see that when measured with the Leo Bodner lag tester, even in their game-specific modes, only 4 projectors had input lag numbers under 50 milliseconds. And only the Nexigo PJ40 was under 20 milliseconds, though the XGIMI Elephas Flip was also very close. And even though the Elephas was technically under 50 milliseconds, it still had more input lag than I would prefer. So at this point, I think that I have enough data to narrow things down a little bit and make some recommendations. And I'm going to use fan noise, speaker quality, and power draw as the tiebreakers here. First, if you're looking for an all-in-one smart projector with a built-in smart OS and good picture quality, then I think the 3 top choices are the Elephas W1K, Alvar F505, and the Dangbei N2. And of those 3, the Elephas W1K is definitely the most well-rounded, finishing in first in the viewing experience testing due to its great tone mapping and image processing, combined with its 735 ANSI lumens and 2883:1 contrast ratio. The Elephas also has very tolerable fan noise at 42.6 decibels. And the built-in speakers are not the highest quality, but they are plenty loud and would probably be acceptable for most people to watch an entire movie.
Julio, good to see you. You got something for us?
From a new ally, a spy in the First Order.
A spy.
The Elephas also had the lowest input lag of these 3 projectors, but it was still very close to 50 milliseconds, which definitely isn't ideal. And the Elephas also had higher than normal power use, drawing 153.2 watts while outputting 735 ANSI lumens for an efficiency of 4.8 lumens per watt. If you're looking for something a little bit smaller and quieter, the Dangbei N2 finished in 5th place for viewing experience despite having lower brightness at just 419 ANSI lumens, and it also had a lower contrast ratio at 1980:1. But it did make up for that with excellent image processing, and the N2 had the quietest fan of any projector in this video at just 34.8 decibels. As for speaker quality, the N2 didn't have the same peak volume as the Elephas, but the speakers were higher quality with more low end and would be more than sufficient for a movie night.
Julio, good to see you. You got something for us?
From a new ally, a spy in the First Order.
A spy.
In my testing, the Dangbei N2 drew 98 watts, but it only output 419 lumens, meaning it was actually the least efficient of these three projectors at 4.28 lumens per watt, and it also had the worst input lag at 98.9 milliseconds, so no gaming on this thing. The Alvar F505 finished second in viewing experience and had very similar raw brightness and contrast numbers to the Elephas at 724 ANSI lumens and 28:41:1 contrast ratio, but the F505 had a significantly louder fan at 48.2 decibels. And though it did have slightly more balanced sound with more bass, the speakers were overall quieter than the Elephas.
Julio, good to see you. You got something for us?
From a new ally, a spy in the First Order.
Spy.
The Alvar also had nearly double the input lag at 82.5 milliseconds, so even though it was more efficient, drawing just 123.6 watts for an efficiency of 5.86 lumens per watt, I wouldn't recommend picking the Alvar over the Elephas. However, all three of these projectors use that NetRange App Store and operating system, which other than full Netflix support leaves a lot to be desired. And I want to make another argument here for just getting a projector with no smart OS and adding a Fire TV stick or a Roku for streaming. And in that case, the Nexigo PJ40 Gen 3 finished third overall for viewing experience with 692 ANSI lumens and 3,173:1 contrast ratio. And importantly, if you want to play video games, it also has a game mode with less than 20 milliseconds of input lag. The PJ40 has an adjustable fan, which is admittedly very loud at its max brightness, measuring in at close to 49 decibels. But that fan can also be adjusted down along with the maximum brightness of the light source, and it can get all the way down to 34.7 decibels if that's what you're going for. At maximum brightness, the PJ40 draws 150.5 watts to output 692 lumens for an efficiency of 4.6 lumens per watt, which is slightly lower than the Elephas. And in addition to not having a smart OS at all, the PJ40 also lacks motorized focus, and it doesn't have a Bluetooth remote. But combining it with a streaming stick, it's the only projector in the video that would check all of my boxes in terms of image quality, input lag, and focus uniformity. If contrast isn't your end-all be-all stat and you're just looking for the highest value in projectors, I feel 100% confident saying that the Wemax Vogue is way more projector than you would typically be able to get for your money. A DLP projector with a 4 LED light source putting out 1,404 measured ANSI lumens for $423 just doesn't line up with the rest of the market. And similar projectors from Dangbei and XGimi are in the $700 to $800 range. And in addition to the more robust and long-lasting DLP projection system, the Wemax's built-in speakers were also in a completely different league with loud, balanced, full-range stereo sound.
Julio, good to see you. You got something for us?
From a new ally, a spy in the First Order.
Spy.
And as I mentioned, the Wemax also has the advantage of projecting with a 100% offset, which means that it's easier to mount on the ceiling or project from a table. And if you need to position it to the side of your screen, the DLP projection system maintains better focus uniformity when it's using Keystone. And the Wemax was also pretty quiet with a fan noise of just 37.4 decibels when it was outputting its full 1,404 lumens. And it drew just 152.3 watts for an efficiency of 9.2 lumens per watt, which is by far the highest in the video. And if the Vogue had decent input lag, it would be the easiest recommendation that I've ever made. But at 53.3 milliseconds, it's not quite as tempting since it is not great for gaming. And last, an honorable mention has to go to the Magcubic HY450 for doing something completely different. And I love the short throw and 100% offset, and I think that it would make a great projector for somebody looking to build a budget golf simulator, and it would also be perfect for doing holiday projection decorations. At $139, the HY450 is also the most lumens per dollar of any of the projectors in the video, but I think I would definitely recommend paying the extra $10 to get the NetRange version of this projector instead of the Android version like I tested. And be aware that it does have a decently loud fan at 47.2 decibels. And the speaker on it is usable, but definitely not great.
Julio, good to see you. You got something for us?
From a new ally, a spy in the First Order.
As always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel, but I do have links down in the description for all the projectors in this video. And as always, I appreciate when you use those links, since as an Amazon affiliate, I do earn a small commission on the sale at no cost to you. I'd also like to thank all of my awesome patrons over at Patreon for their continued support of my channel. And if you're interested in supporting my channel, please check out the links down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching The Hookup.